Welcome to another episode of Think Development Out Loud. Today we have Professor Gordon Crawford, who is a research professor in global development in the Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations, CTPSR, at Coventry University. His research has involved work in South Africa, Indonesia, Nepal, Ghana, and recently Cameroon. He's an honorary professor at the University of Würzburg, Germany, and was the inaugural co-director of the Marianne Institute for Advanced Studies in Africa, MIASA, at the University of Ghana from March 2018 till December 2020. He's an associate editor for Africa Spectrum, which is an open access journal, and a former editor for the journal Democratization. Professor Crawford's research focuses on the nexus of human rights, democracy, and development, especially in countries of the Global South. He has undertaken fieldwork-based research in Ghana on the issues of decentralization and poverty reduction, on rights-based approaches to development, and on Chinese migration into small-scale gold mining. Most recently, with Cameroonian colleagues, he has undertaken research into the ongoing Anglophone conflict in Cameroon. He has recently co-authored a research handbook on democracy and development. Prior to an academic career, he worked in welfare rights and community development activities in the UK, as well as in adult education. Thank you so much, Professor Crawford, for joining us, and we look forward to hearing about your latest research.
Very much for the invitation to contribute to your Think Development Out Loud series. I wanted to talk about the research on the civil conflict in the Anglophone regions of Cameroon that I've been involved with for the past 3 years or so. Initially, we had a small pilot project, which was followed by a larger project funded by the AHRC as an urgency grant. And these projects have both been undertaken with Cameroonian colleagues, both academics and practitioner NGO colleagues. And the results of the pilot project can be found in a downloadable report on the Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations website, and also in an open access article in the journal Conflict Development and Security. Now, the focus of this pilot project was on the role of CSOs, civil society organizations, in attempts at conflict resolution in Cameroon in a context of what is known as shrinking civic space. So in terms of the academic literature, we examine what seems to be a paradox between the so-called local turn in peace building, which emphasizes the role of local non-governmental actors, and this phenomenon of shrinking civic space where government restrictions limit the actions of civil society organizations. So the findings were that CSOs have faced considerable constraints, including intimidation and violence at times, but they've responded in innovative ways that demonstrate adaptation and resistance to a context of shrinking civic space. That said, quite positive results in that sense, but CSOs have not been successful, of course, in conflict resolution efforts, and the war in the Anglophone regions continues. And this is a highly neglected and relatively unknown civil war. As we speak, the Africa Cup of Nations, the football tournament, is taking place in Cameroon, and the government acts as if there was no conflict going on. It only refers to the conflict as a security crisis and talks about a reconstruction and development program as if the conflict was in the past. But the reality is that the conflict is ongoing between the state security forces and the armed separatist groups who are fighting for an independent state of Ambazonia in the two English-speaking regions of Cameroon, the Northwest and Southwest regions. So the conflict is now in its 5th year, and the consequences for the civilian population have been terrible. Out out of a population of less than 4 million people in the two English-speaking regions, over 1 million have been internally displaced. Another 60,000 are refugees in Nigeria. Thousands have been killed. Hundreds of villages have been burnt down. Most schools still remain closed, and hundreds of thousands of children remain out of school. One particularly horrific consequence of the war is the huge increase in sexual and gender-based violence, with the rape of women and girls reaching endemic proportions and described by the UN as rampant and pervasive in a report last year. So it's a grim situation and one that urgently needs resolution, yet the government seems determined to pursue a military strategy, and the armed separatist groups similarly remain intransigent in this situation where no negotiations are ongoing. So hence our second research project. This was entitled Voices from Ground Zero, Interrogating History, Culture and Identity in the Resolution of Cameroon's Anglophone Conflict. Ground Zero is the term that is used by local people to describe the zones within the Northwest and Southwest regions where the conflict is most intense. Essentially, we wanted to give a voice to those most affected civilians in the conflict. We felt that their voices have been ignored, yet they are the ones who are suffering the consequences of this conflict. We also wanted their experiences and perspectives in order to inform the wider world of what is going on currently in the English-speaking regions of Cameroon. This conflict was declared to be the world's most neglected displacement crisis by the Norwegian Research Council in 2019 and 2020. It is very underreported, and we wanted to give affected civilians the opportunity to articulate their experiences of the conflict, its impact on their lives, and also their ideas and perspectives on possible ways to resolve the conflict. So who are the we? Well, there are a couple of us in Coventry, myself and Dr. Nancy Annan. The rest of the team are in Cameroon, a mixture of academics from different disciplines and 4 NGO partners, all of whom are involved in responding to the crisis in various ways. For instance, provision of humanitarian assistance or monitoring of human rights violations, or providing psychosocial support to survivors of gender-based violence. Let me turn to the methodology, or more precisely, the data collection methods. And there were 3 main methods. Firstly, focus groups with internally displaced persons. We had separate women's and men's groups in 4 different locations, so 8 focus groups in total. Secondly, interviews with community leaders and local organizations, including women's groups, youth groups, church groups, and so forth. Over 30 interviews were undertaken. And then thirdly, collage making sessions, again with IDPs, internally displaced persons. This time mixed groups in 4 different locations. The collage making was new to me, and it was led by one of the Cameroonian colleagues who's a political scientist by profession, but also a fine artist. And the aim of this method was to enable those people who are perhaps less confident verbally to express their experiences and perspectives on canvas, making use of both art materials and also newspaper and magazine cuttings. In addition, we had 2 consultative dialogue workshops, one with NGO representatives and activists, and the other with policymakers from both government and the diplomatic community. And the idea of these workshops was partly an opportunity for discussion of our preliminary findings, but also an opportunity to gather more data on the views and perspectives of those organizations. Now, the challenges. Well, the research was undertaken during the COVID-19 pandemic and all the challenges that this has entailed. Most of the fieldwork was undertaken in December 2020 and January 2021. And one big constraint, of course, was that myself and Nancy were unable to travel to Cameroon at that time. So the fieldwork was undertaken entirely by the Cameroonian team and also had to be undertaken with implementation of all appropriate COVID protocols. So it was disappointing for the two of us to be stuck in the UK and unable to participate in the fieldwork, which personally is the part of development research that I enjoy most. But interestingly, there were perhaps also advantages here and maybe lessons that can be taken forward into the future. So the project, as proposed, did have a decolonial agenda, both in terms of the leading role taken by the Cameroonian team, including the non-academic partners, and in terms of highlighting the voices of those civilians most affected by the conflict. The fact that myself in particular, the only whitey in the team, that I could not participate in the fieldwork probably enabled this decolonial agenda more so than if I had been present, despite all good intentions. I think it also enhanced the data collection in that the Cameroonian researchers were able to communicate with Anglophone Cameroonians in Pidgin English where appropriate, and from a position of shared experience. I think this probably enabled the participants to be more at ease and to articulate their experiences in an open manner without the presence of outsiders like myself, which may have been more constraining on them. In addition, a criticism of Global North, Global South academic collaboration is that Global North researchers retain the leading role and the Global South researchers end up being mere data collectors. Our experience does not necessarily challenge this, but the key role played in the whole project by Cameroonian colleagues really highlights the significance of their contribution to knowledge production on this conflict. And here I'm reminded of the call by the late Claude Ake, the Nigerian political scientist, his call for endogenous knowledge production on Africa. In other words, the development of what he called a social science scholarship that is rooted in its culture and locale. And it's my hope that our research project on the Anglophone conflict in Cameroon will have contributed to that goal, to such a goal in a small way, partly intentional and partly inadvertently, or at least the circumstances of the COVID-19 restrictions have expedited that process of undertaking research that is generated by local researchers and activists, and that is rooted in its culture and locale. We are currently writing up the research. I hope it will be available in a freely downloadable report in a few months' time. You can judge it then as to whether we have met those goals or not. Thank you very much.